is testimony of another autistic person. This is how you treat us. You might notice that the person who typed that seems to be intelligent. It's not some shit-eating fucking moron like you guys try to pretend. Oh, every autistic person is a shit-eating retard. That's how you paint us. You curse at us and yell at us and don't allow us to speak. If we do speak, you talk over the top of us. And then, of course, you tell us we're the ones who are talking over you. No, you're being unreasonable. You don't want us to speak. You think you know better than us because we're retarded, apparently. And therefore, it's always your turn to speak. Only your opinions matter. Our experiences don't. However, that's not what's leading to our downfall. We got a bunch of idiots who are only about making profit. Unfortunately, that screws all of us over. Severely. And we got a lot of major issues. There's also a lot of possible solutions. Modular design, however, is the only thing that can save our country at this point. We've made everything too complicated, like Germans in World War II. At the very beginning, they had training tanks. That's all they had. Don't get me wrong, 5% of their tanks were medium tanks. They had literally 0 heavy tanks. Literally 0. By the middle of the war, they were trying to push out medium heavy to heavy tanks. This doesn't just apply to warfare, though. Why did America do so great? Why did the Russians do so great? Mass production. We didn't need the biggest or the best. We worked in mass quantity. While a German tank that broke down on the front lines had to be towed, put on a train, and taken back to the factory it was built in order to rebuild it when it's damaged, Americans could scavenge off of other busted tanks. If you had a transmission that got a direct hit on your tank, and the tank next to you got a direct hit through the rear tread and through the engine compartment, both tanks are out of action. One of them doesn't have an engine. The other one, well, it's 47 bolts. You take them off, you can even use the turret on some of them tanks. The turret and the gun could be used for lifting things. I wouldn't recommend it, not if you want your gun to stay accurate, but those guns are a lot bigger than a rifle. It's not like trying to pick up a 600-pound engine with a rifle barrel. We're talking about severe tonnage, but the rifle barrel on a tank can handle it. Now, when we start looking at Hobart's funnies, what are these? A bunch of funky-looking tanks. Now, what did we do with Model Ts? When the Model T came out, Americans loved the Model T. It was modular. It truly was. You could take off the cab and replace it with another cab pretty easily. You couldn't trade a truck for a car, though. They had different frames. But pretty soon, people started creating tow trucks and a lot of other really cool stuff. Cherry pickers and even vehicles that would lift. Vehicles that drove on screws instead of wheels. How strange. How bizarre. By the end of the war, the Germans finally caught on. By the end of the war, they had to. The Me-262 was built all over Germany in forests and caves. Things were modular. The Jeep, American Jeeps, modular. There were over a dozen attachments, including one that made them into helicopters and several that made Jeeps into boats. Just stuff that you bolt on aftermarket like. Many engines you can buy have aftermarket parts that you can buy. Massimo, Edelbrock. You can change out a 2-barrel carburetor for a 4-barrel carburetor. You can change out a single-barrel Rochester pretty easily. Ask me how I know, because I'm not a mechanic. And I was able to change out my Rochester. Matter of fact, I didn't have to change out my Rochester. I just took it out, cut some new seals out of a cereal box, put it back together, and it worked. Now, I do got to admit that it wasn't my idea to do that with a cereal box. People have been using cardboard since the 1920s for seals and gaskets on engines, including on carburetors. By the way, the first carburetors were oil breathers. That meant you didn't get as much power because you didn't have as much airflow. These were popular in the late 40s and the 1950s even. By the late 50s, most oil breathers were high-end. The modern air filter helped us with that. The modern air filter, modular. You can fit a square filter in my car. You can fit a round filter in my car. You can fit a cone filter in my car. It's a matter of modular pieces. It's got a 3-inch wide opening that goes into the engine. That's where the airflow goes. Anything that'll attach to that 3-inch opening that goes to an air filter will work. My air filter is a sock, not a joke. Matter of fact, speaking of, I've got a package of socks here and I'm about to change my air filter. When it comes to modular designs, we've seen some modular designs to simplify literally everything on a car. Makes it so that you can bolt on entire sections or remove entire sections, just like with a American tank in World War II. Now the Germans, because of their production level, and because they had to build it in the way that they did, and they were already set up for cottage industry, not for mass production, each and every part was just a little bit different, and it had to be fit to the right machine. Americans had such close tolerances because of their manufacturing techniques that you could take a part off one Abrams tank and it would directly bolt to another Abrams tank and work immediately. Abrams is a modern tank, isn't it? It's actually considered mobile artillery. We had the Sherman tanks in World War II, and the Grants, and the Lees. All modular. Most of the stuff from Russia, modular. Loose tolerances in Russia, tight tolerances here. For Russia, it was a matter of, well, we may not have the best armor, and sliding off of your tank at the wrong area might slice you to ribbons because of rough welds, and it might not be water resistant in the least bit. You might have dust that comes into your vehicle if the welds aren't all perfect. But the other thing is, many Russian tanks were saved by their shoddy design, by their shoddy implementation of construction. There was more than one Russian tank driver and commander who cited the fact that their armor cracked across the seam and slid as the only reason that the German 88 didn't penetrate their vehicle. That's right, a German 88. A German 88 could literally shoot from the front end of a T-34 all the way through the back, through the engine compartment, all of it, and still go out the back. Now, if your armor cracks and it gives just a little bit, that helps to redirect the shell into a ricochet. The Russians also made a type of ceramic armor that's now famous because we copied it and called it dragon skin. They originally designed it for tanks. What it was a series of ceramic discs that are curved and stacked, and they're offset, and they're about 3 to 4 inches of it, which doesn't seem like very much. And behind that is your plate steel, but in between the layers of ceramic is case hardened steel. So it's a very thin amount of case hardened steel, and what happens is when you hit the ceramic, because it's got a slight bow to it, and it's of course at an angle, when the round hits it, what it wants to do is it wants to turn and pivot on that curved part. And what that does is when the round hits it and it wants to dig in, what it ends up doing instead is, even though it is starting to dig in, when it starts turning, it starts redirecting the shell. And it may knock off 5 or 6 of the little tiles, each of these tiles being about 6 inches in diameter. But because of the overlap, if you hit in between 2 of the tiles, you're hitting dead center on another one, and you are also hitting very squarely on a couple of very hard steel chunks that we're going to help to redirect. It might veer off to one side or the other. It might veer up. Very rarely would it veer down because of the angle that it's hitting at. It would have to be a lob shot that comes down into it like this in order for it to shay that way. But also, because it is coming this way, it's going to tumble the shell sideways and smack flat. That's a lot more surface area, which makes it so that the PSI on any given area is a lot less. Now, when it comes to modular designs, we're not talking about modular weapons. We have those. We've got a bunch of those. The Sidewinder missiles can be fired from a lot of different craft. The tow missile can fire from a lot of different craft. A lot of the shoulder-mounted rockets can be mounted to something like the Mongoose, and you can fire literally 8 to 12 at once, or pretty darn close. The new turrets that we have allow somebody to basically designate targets and press a target lock button, and your tow missile will lock onto a silhouette. You can lock onto up to 12 silhouettes and fire all at once, because each one has a slightly different array. You can actually modify it so that it'll only go for a certain beam of light, specifically the beam designed for that particular shot. You don't want to have 4 tanks that you want to hit and all of your tow missiles all converge on the same target. If each one has and they're laser beam targeted, by the way. If each one of them has a different designation of laser beam, each one will only follow that particular laser beam. And they're able to do that with filters, which is really cool. If you have a certain amount of green light and you have a green laser with a little bit of red, you can designate with the filters whether or not it's even able to pick up a laser beam. As far as America goes, we do have to have cottage industry, which is what Germany had at the beginning of World War II and also at the end. But the cottage industry at the beginning was everything gets made in the same factory. By the end of the war, it's all right. We're going to make nose cones over by Brunnsvagen. We'll build the pieces of fuselage over by Nuremberg or Dachau. A lot of these vehicles were built underground in facilities like Bergkristall and Gusen 2. We don't need slave labor. We need the American people to stop being slaves, to be allowed to have their own industry, to not have to spend $30,000 to $50,000 just to get a patent, to try to get their life started. Many Americans have great ideas that never come to fruition, or they have to wait until they're in their late 60s before they have the money to create it. When it comes to treating other human beings like human beings, we have to establish that first. We have to establish what human rights are, and we have established that. We're also not following it here in America. That would be like if the Germans in World War II, or just prior to World War II, had tried to create a peace commission and then went to war after creating that peace commission with all the people they were wanting to supposedly go to peace with. By the way, they did that. America's done that. Russia has done that. The idea of a Cold War is the act of having other people do your fighting for you, testing your gear and equipment. That's what the Spanish Civil War did. It allowed the Russians, the British, the Germans, the French. Everybody had troops there. And more importantly, everybody had their newest equipment there to test out. The thing is, we got a lot of stuff that requires very specialist and specialty parts now. Thank goodness there's at least some universality when it comes to plugging in your electronics. But not to the greater degree that we should. See, each one of these people want to propagate a situation where you have to buy specifically their stuff. If you don't buy specifically Honda stuff for your Honda car, you're pretty well screwed. Now, a lot of the engines that we built in World War II, they were used for multiple applications. The Pratt & Whitney engines that went into aircraft also went into tanks. They also went into PT boats. They also were used to run diesel generators. Diesel generators. Pratt & Whitney engines were not standard diesel. The ones they put in airplanes, not standard diesel. The ones that they put in submarines were a different design altogether, and they ran off of actual diesel. Now, all these parts, we made sure they were interchangeable for a reason. We could change it in the field. We didn't have to send it back to the factory. Also, we've got an abundance of machines. If we've got 20 machines that were all knocked out, we could probably scavenge 15 of those machines back together. America needs to work more modularly. We don't need everything to be completely fucking fancy and rotomolded and injection molded and foamy and all sorts of other shit. We just need things that fucking work. We've made things so incredibly complicated and expensive that nearly nothing works anymore. Anyway, it looks like my battery's about to die, so I'm gonna plug it in here. I'm gonna end the video. I'm gonna see if Dallas has gotten back to me yet. I told him I'd get a hold of him at 10, and I did get a hold of him at 10. I'm just waiting on a reply from him. Modular is the way to go. having an engine pack like GM was originally doing. GM wasn't really a car manufacturer, it was just a engine manufacturer. Other than Henry Ford, who tried to do it all himself, most of the other companies, they were basically kit cars that were assembled. They'd order a frame from here and a few body parts from there and an engine from another company, and they'd assemble them together. Ford was able to sell stuff for cheaper and in larger quantities because he didn't give a shit about giving you every single option. You can do that aftermarket yourself. You don't want a black car? Well, after you buy it, you paint it whatever fucking color you want. We make stuff that's cheap and breaks easily, and we call it Chinese. Meanwhile, the Chinese are producing better things than we are now, and still producing them for cheaper. That's because Americans have too many hands in the pot.